Now, just before we came on air, I caught up with Nabila Ramdani. She's a Middle East expert. She's been giving me her verdict on the address.
It was, in my opinion, one of the most self-serving, cynical, and ultimately macabre speeches imaginable. And in fact, any illusions about 2013 opening in a spirit of peace and indeed optimism were certainly crushed by his speech today, because rather than offering compromise and a willingness to step down as the bloodshed is intensifying, the president effectively said that he would remain in power indefinitely, and this is despite 60,000 people dying since the start of the revolt some 2 years ago, a revolt which has now turned into a savage civil war. And he instead blamed alien powers for an internal revolt, which is, of course, one of the favorite tricks of desperate tyrants. And the fact that he made a theatrical address from Damascus Opera House added to the cynical tone of his speech.
At the same time, though, I mean, in the course of that speech, he did offer a national dialogue conference. He offered a referendum on a national charter. So some people might say, well, look, he's a man who is prepared to compromise.
Well, I think how the Syrians and indeed the international community viewed his speech is, instead of replacing compassion for the victims of his suppression, instead of showing compassion for the victims of his brutal suppression, he used bland political jargon, and he offered technical measures to end the civil war, including a national charter, as you said, a referendum, constitutional reform, and even an expanded government. And there was a particularly devious reference to reconciliation and hints at an amnesty for those who have not betrayed Syria. But what observers would argue is that Assad is not in a position to reform his way out of trouble. That possibility ended when he started slaughtering his own people in a ruthless manner.
Although people would say that of the 60,000 who've been killed so far in this conflict, according to UN estimates, not all of those by any means have been killed by troops loyal to President Assad, have they? The insurgents, the rebels themselves have been responsible for murders and atrocities.
Well, very much so, and it has to be noted that the human rights organizations have reported crimes against humanity and indeed atrocities committed by both sides. But it remains the case that the responsibility lies in a majority in the hands of Assad. He can't not be seen as the root causes of the trouble and indeed of all this bloodshed. And the fact that he tries to displace the responsibility to a dark, alien, foreign power, well, that's a language that's, specific to dictators, effectively.
Do you think there will be people who are supportive of President Assad, though, who believe him, who will think that the civil war in Syria is being stoked up by the West?
No, I think it's abundantly clear to anybody that the president has no intention whatsoever of compromising, and that he will continue to prosecute one of the most savage civil wars in Middle East history indefinitely. And it didn't go unnoticed as well that the district around the Damascus Opera House was locked down by soldiers and police in the hours before Assad's speech. So the president affirmed enemies are no longer just massing in enemy cities like Aleppo, but they are flooding into the suburbs of the major cities of the countries, including Damascus itself. So, although we've seen, an exuberant crowd of effectively flunkies chanting that they will sacrifice their blood and their soul for the president, this doesn't reflect by any means the national mood.
At the same time, though, Nabila, say this with all due respect, many experts predicted that President Assad would be deposed within weeks and then within months. Here he is, he's still in power. Hasn't the time come to talk about compromise, to talk about negotiation, because the man isn't going anywhere soon?
Well, I agree with that completely, and I'm not arguing for a second that his undoing is nowhere near. In fact, what Assad's speech signified was his determination to use his Air Force's control of the skies and his well trained army and his relatively well equipped army as well, backed up by impressive powers like China and indeed Russia, to hold on to power indefinitely and to kill and maim as many more enemies as possible. And what the oratory sounded like, it effectively was a promise that 2013 and perhaps beyond is likely to be even more horrific for Syria than 2012.
There you go. That's Middle East expert Nabila Ramdani talking about President Assad's address today at the Opera House in Damascus.